So we're going to continue. Hopefully, you can all see my screen, right? The slides. You can see this, right, Dan?
I can, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Mate.
So yeah, we're going to continue from the last session. Me, Jahirul, Amin, or Jay, and Dan Gilligan, VFX Onset TD, back again. And just to give you a quick overview before we dive in, we're primarily going to just discuss what you need to capture on set, and then how the data is used in production. I should stress that the what you need to capture on set is all dependent on time more than anything. So don't walk away from this going up to your first AD saying, I now want 2 hours with this single asset on set, close everything down, I need the time, because it's not going to happen really. You have to kind of do what you can with the time you get given, essentially, or request time, and hopefully they'll give you some. But that's the main aim, is just to look at on-set data, see what's captured and how it's used in production, essentially. Last time we covered HDRIs, panorama and geometry reference. So we've got quite a bit to cover this time, but I think we'll blast through it pretty quickly. Especially this stuff, we should be able to go through it pretty quickly. So we're going to carry on with the acquisition side of things, which is more capturing data for kind of assets and shots, but I would say mainly assets is the big thing here. And then on this side, we're going to capture a lot of shot reference for match move, camera tracking, body tracking, roto prep, etc. All of that stuff this stuff is gold essentially for. Well, roto and prep have to clean up the stuff, but yeah, that stuff there for wrangling. So again, just a quick little one page where we got to, and the reason why onset data is so important. Again, it goes to everyone. Everyone is pretty much going to benefit from having onset data, and I could just draw arrows to literally every department. It is where the reference comes in, or one of the primary sources of reference. You might have other client images, concept art, etc. that comes in, but if you're dealing with VFX data and there's stuff that's happening on set, that is crucial to everything else, I would say. That's true to say, Dan?
Wholeheartedly, yeah. Everybody gets a touch of the reference.
So last time, just to blast over, we covered HDRIs. We talked about a few different kind of workflows of capturing HDRIs, 4 positions, 3 positions, different lenses, all of that stuff. This is the output, so used for lighting, mapped onto a dome. And we also spoke about mapping this onto geometry, so you get more 3D, better 3D representation of what the lights are doing. If this is a street light, for example, here. So this thing here, these building lights would kind of all go in 3D space. And grey ball, chrome ball, Macbeth chart, panoramas, all of that stuff we discussed as well. And again, capturing not just 360s but individual lights. Okay, so HDRIs, 360s, panoramas, photogrammetry, so geometry reference at this stage, LiDAR scans, and that's pretty much where we got to. So this is photogrammetry with photography mapped on top. Scans again, body scans, so photogrammetry used in production with retopologized mesh. Cool. Any questions on that before we jump in then to carry on through our checklist? Okay, so we're going to start with I'm kind of going down the route of model, texture, look dev, essentially. So we'll work through that kind of pipeline if you were pushing an asset through and then rigging, let's say. So I'm going to tackle it like this, but clearly when you're capturing this reference, you'll capture it pretty much at the same time. You'll capture the model, the texture, the look dev reference, and motion reference if you can. So texture reference, as well as taking just single images of an asset, I would recommend, if you can and you have the right kit with you, capturing polarized and unpolarized photography, because what that's going to give the texture artist is a better idea of what the spec is doing and a better idea of what that base diffuse channel is doing. And you can get really far by capturing polarized photography. The only downside is you have to have a really controlled environment for shooting polarized photography. You have to polarize the lights, you have to polarize the camera, and so on. So it can't be easily done outside, for example. But this does give you something like this, where we do have the default image, let's say, which is the diffuse and the spec, and then we can use the polarizing filters to get the diffuse, and then we can extract the spec from that, so we get this idea of what the spec should be. And again, this thing, if it's done well, can be used as a projection for texturing. We've got some shadow information still, but hopefully we can grade it. But it's going to be a lot easier to work with this for texture projection than that, and a lot more accurate, because this is giving us color rather than color with spec as well. The other benefit of doing this is it's a very good way of revealing what's metal and non-metal. So the texture and the look dev artist can start to deconstruct the materials a bit better. So we can tell that anything that's kind of gone black, that was shiny almost, is metal, and anything that's got color is basically a non-metal. There's obviously going to be bits and bobs in between, but this gives us information about what shaders we should use. So we know this thing here has gone black, so that's going to be a metal. And if this was a colored metal, we'd actually see the color come through here. So these aren't colored metals, but if this was, gold or something, or a bronze, we'll see that color in the spec. So again, it's a good way if you have the polarizing filters available, and the lenses, and the lights polarized, you can really start to reveal more information about what you're shooting and give that to the artist later on. Here's just that same example, but just so you can see the images captured, we've got also bracketed images for the texture reference. This is then taking those images with the and the cameras lined up in Maya. And then in this example, I'm just going to take them over to Mari and do a kind of projection essentially. What you can also do is you could, if you do have the photography with just the diffuse, is you could take it all back into something like reality capture and reproject in there as well, which gives you a quick V1 on your model. So even though I'm doing this in Mari through one camera view, you could take all of those cameras back into reality capture or photo scan, reproject, and then you get your V1 very quickly without having to do anything kind of artistic.
It's super useful, and reality capture's texture reprojection takes seconds once you've already solved them. So it's really good to get a version 1 out.
Yeah, and I guess that's similar to when we spoke about the grey ball and the chrome ball for HDRIs, where you're matching the reference, and if these are the CG balls, the idea is your V1 is just to match this reference here. So in this case, if you were to take polarized, unpolarized photography and project the just the diffuse images, you get your V1 very quickly. You can then compare that to your photography, and again, hopefully it lines up before you start working any further, before you start doing any other work. Here's another example. This is just the diffuse, so it's been polarized. This is with spec and diffuse, and again, what this reveals is everything here is a metal. In this case, it was a painted gold leaf on here, so it's gone a bit darker. And then this here is a metal because it's gone darker. This here is a metal. This is a metal as well, but it's catching. So again, it just allows me to now in the shader know that all of this stuff will have a certain IOR, and all of this stuff will have a different IOR. Everything metal. So, And again, I can use this. This is my base color, and you can see how different that brown is to this brown here. So when you're projecting just straight photography as is, you're not really projecting the real color down. You're just projecting the diffuse and some of that speck onto it. So it's so you'd have to grade it essentially to be more like this. Does that make sense?
It does to me.
Yeah, it would to you, because you told me this stuff. I'm now telling you back what you told me. Again, here's another example. Same asset, just from a different angle. I've just rotated it. But again, just by photography and capturing data, we now have something that we can actually project, and it's ready to go. It doesn't need any tweaking. It doesn't need any grading. It's just been lit evenly and shot in a way that allows us to project straight onto it. So very, very useful stuff. When you are doing your texture capture, I guess, as much as possible, you want to have angles where they can project onto planar views. So things like walls and stuff. This is from textures.com. As you're shooting your textures, you don't want to go from funky angles or anything, because it's hard to project. So whoever's doing the onset capture needs to actually think like a texture artist when they're capturing, so it can be easily used back in the office later on. I've seen some reference where it just comes in and every angle is slightly different essentially. So locking things off, either rotating the asset and hitting the front, side, back, or shooting very, very flat on would be a good idea.
For sure. And often, just if you use a tripod with a three-way head and the ability to tilt your lens, your camera on your tripod to get a perpendicular view, you can get some tile sets of the ground or the walls, and just be versatile with your equipment, so you can capture everything around that you intend to make in CG.
Yeah. And actually,
especially when it comes to environments more than props or anything like that. But it's useful to understand you can capture everything as reference, because even if it might not be used, it's great to have it as a baseline. Even if you're not extending that specific texture, you understand what the texture looked like, how it reacted with the light that it was lit with, and you get a reference of how to start the look dev process in terms of from the real world set.
And I should add, although we're looking at these images from, this is textures.com and I didn't take them obviously, is when you're capturing this reference as well, it doesn't have to be just the one image. You can do that thing with the panoramas where you're getting the overlap, so you get a higher res texture as well. But again, you would need a tripod for that, so you can move the tripod. It's a big lens, isn't it? Move the tripod evenly across the shoot. I thought I was going to say something about that. Oh yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned here. When I shoot textures, I do shoot 3 brackets, polarized, unpolarized, which is what we're seeing here. So 3 brackets where we've got spec and diffuse, and then 3 brackets where we've got just the diffuse essentially. And again, I would only do this in a controlled environment. And the reason for that is you just get more detail as well. So if you take these 3 images shot with different shutter speeds but with the same f-stop and with the same ISO, you can then convert that to a 16-bit high dynamic range image essentially, and then that can be used for your projection work rather than a single 8-bit image. And this just allows you, if you shoot these textures and you grab the gray ball as well, or the Macbeth chart more importantly, I should note with all this reference that we're capturing, we should always shoot the Macbeth chart, because that way we can grade this more accurately as well, so we get something a bit more evenly toned later on.
I would say this links to the photogrammetry side of things. I know we touched on it last time, but you can see all of the specular highlights there. As you would turn this object, all of those would distort, so your photogrammetry software wouldn't be able to find correct features to build your geometry. Whereas if you look at the polarized version of it, the cross-polarized version without any specularity, there's a lot more feature detection available there. So you'll get a better model, and 2, you've got a complete texture set to crack on with afterwards. It just makes everything a little bit more streamlined.
Christian's just asking, are you using long lenses for this photography, for texture shoots?
I use anything above a 50 if it's in an environment, or if it's close-up textures using 100. But obviously, depending on how small your texture is or how large your texture is, it's worth having a variety of lenses with you. Ideally primes, so I carry a 50 and 100 normally. 200 if it's a special occasion, I guess.
Yeah, I'm the same, 50 and 100, and then I like a 200 if I have one around. L series, if it's Canon, are fancy. They're the ones I would ideally like all the time. But 50 and 100, less distortion as well, which is always good for texture work. So what do we get to? So yeah, so that's shooting textures, again bracketed, polarized, unpolarized. And then the other good thing is when you're shooting this way, when you're shooting this set of images and this set, you have to make sure the camera doesn't move or the asset doesn't move. It's just a polarizing filter on the lens. That way you can overlay them to do this. If the images don't overlay, if you don't get these images lining up correctly, you can't extract the spec because they just won't line up. So it's really important that the asset doesn't move and the cameras don't move. Adil is asking, since the lights are also polarized, will the polarizing effect work when you go around the subject, i.e. moving the camera?
I think you have an area, but every object has its nooks and crannies and reflections. All the polarizing filters are doing is making the beams of light parallel to one another, essentially. So when it reflects off a specular surface, it will cancel out with your polarizing lens at perpendicular degree to your cross-polarized light source. Your perfectly specular highlights will be removed completely, whereas any diffuse light will still be allowed to come through, but at a reduced intensity. So if you move your camera, if you have your fixed lights there, and there is an area of the object that is reflecting in a weird way or even refracting in a weird way, you will still see some highlights there. But if you keep your camera in a sort of fixed position and rotate your object, it's always much better practice.
Yeah, I used to position my lights like this just so it's easier to get more light on the asset and the camera here. But I found even like this, again, I'm no scientist, but it just wasn't giving me, it wasn't removing all the spec. So I ended up now, when I light an asset, I actually have the lights going in this direction with the camera. And I can find that way, if this was a chrome ball, you can pretty much make it black, essentially. But yeah, as soon as you start moving that camera, like Dan says, it's not going to give you the same result. So the asset has to turn not... Sorry?
Oh, hello. This, props. I don't know whether you can see this or whether it would be a useful explanation, but can you see these? So these are polarizing filters. Essentially, one is on your camera and one is on your lens, right? So this is sort of an example I make to sort of get a basic understanding. If you rotate that, it plucks out all of the polarized light. As you can see, it's sort of gone dark. You're getting some reflections off, but if I turn that, you can now see through it all. So if you're at a slight angle, like i.e. what we're saying there, where the lights are sort of a diagonal intensity toward your object, you're only going to get half of it covered. So you're not going to get a full blocking perpendicular light source or the polarization. So if you go to too obtuse of an angle, then you'll allow some specularity to come through.
Cool. And then Sean's asking, what kind of lighting kit are you using? How much do you have to worry about the ambient light in the room affecting it?
When I normally do a setup, if you're doing polarized lights, those would be your sole light source in the room. So you're only getting your, otherwise, because the ambient light source isn't going to be polarized, so you'll get additional reflections through that won't be cross-polarized out.
Yeah, so you have to block all the light coming in and turn off all the, room lights, essentially. If you've got spotlights or something, all of that has to go. So the only light sources are the, the lights that are polarized. That's going to be the ideal scenario. you might still get creeping of light coming in through windows and stuff if you can't fully block it up. Sometimes that doesn't make too much of a difference, but if you do have a very well lit room during the day with light coming in through the windows, it's going to affect the shoot essentially. So ideally it's a room where there's no windows, there's only one way in, which is the door, and you can turn all the lights off and just use the lights that you have set up with polarizing filter on there. That would be the ideal scenario.
I always go above and beyond as well in terms of this to capture HDRs in these environments that we create for capturing props, and let's say if we have two light sources, I would do an HDR with both lights and then one for each light as the sole source, and then additionally do an ambient pass as well. So you can capture any ambient light within your HDR, so you know what's there. Just for extra reference, because it only takes 2 seconds to do an HDR in that sort of environment.
Cool. Okay. So so this is just more texture reference again from clear angle. We have the diffuse here that's been shot with polarized lenses. We then have the spec, and we have a normal in this case as well, and a displacement. So lots of information that they should be able to use in post to create something that matches pretty quickly to the reference. So I wanted to put look dev reference in here because I always find there's not enough look dev reference that gets captured. It kind of gets ignored. Everyone thinks if you have the textual reference and the model reference, then you're good to go. But what the look dev reference is, it tells you how the object responds to light. With a static image, it doesn't tell you that much about what happens when you move the light around an asset. So look development reference for me is crucial, so we can then judge if our shaders respond to the lights just like the real world asset responds to the lighting in the real world. So again, it's one of those things that I think is really missed. So this is dodgy shoot I did. Again, I'm capturing color for everything so I can grade everything later on. I don't know what I'm doing in this video actually. This should be the right video. Let me just push ahead. So in this case, I couldn't move the lights around the asset, but what I could do is turn the asset, do a video, and then get an idea of how this asset responds to light. So in a second, I get a good reference about the roll-off, the roughness of the asset and so on. And again, there's some of this information in the photography, but now I can just see how that goes over the surfaces. Because some of the times it might be your shaders are correct, but your geometry's not, matching your reference as closely as it could. So this way we get some idea of how the object responds to that light as well.
And that's useful wherever you are, especially with vehicles as well. If you're capturing a vehicle, it's a great idea to do sort of stabilized, as stabilized as you can video of around the car, and also at different angles toward the windows and any sort of metallic paint that you may have. I mean, you can even go to a point where you can angle a grid or a checkerboard, like a lens grid or a color chart on the side to see how that refracts within the paint of your object as well, depending on how complex your materials will be. But video is great because it's an easy resource for an artist to look at, and you can gather a lot of information very quickly from it. Not necessarily from a technical point, like a physically usable point, but from a visual aspect, it's invaluable.
So I wanted to put this example on there because when I think we spoke about it last time, when people, or maybe this was a different session, when people capture a texture in the olden days, let's say 5-10 years ago, they would take the color map and they would make it black and white, and that would be used as a spec map. You would desaturate it, that becomes your spec, and then it also becomes a bump if you invert it or do whatever jazz. But we can see with this asset that the roughness of the material goes over everything, over all of this text and so on. So if you took this as a color map, if I just write robot or Rob for short, If I took that as my color map and I converted that to a black and white map and used that as my roughness map, let's say, then this area here would be rougher than this area here, or vice versa. So again, if someone had produced that as a texture, as in that went straight into my roughness, but it was black and white, we would be able to, look at this video reference and say there's something wrong with your roughness map, because this object has the same roughness all over. It has that same response to light, which we're not seeing in the shader. Does that make sense? I know that's usually I show more images for that as an example. Yeah, okay, but yeah, here's just some good reference of looking at the roughness of an object and how that light just responds, or how the object responds to that light. This is from Clear Angle. So this is their shoots for digidoubles, body scans. And again, what they're doing is they're turning these lights on one at a time, and it goes around. The person's not spinning, by the way, it's just the different cameras. So, I'm basically static here. I'm a bit taller than that. I look quite small in this now. But I'm basically standing there. I look like a little child.
I think between the captures I can see you smiling more and more when it's happening.
I'd be awful at a capture. You don't want me, you wouldn't want me as I'd just be pulling stupid faces as it goes around. But these lights go off one at a time, and we just basically go around the asset to see, again, how does it respond to light. We can check things like subsurface scattering and all of that stuff. So it's a great way of seeing something and then using that as reference later on. I think I showed this last time. This just tells you where those cameras are so you can match your photography. And again, this is just showing some additional reference that you get captured. So you get the HDRI to match lighting, you get the grey ball and the chrome ball for reference. And you can see with this chrome ball, it's black because it's polarized. So you can see with that metal, you can just get rid of all of that reflection other than the light sources. And again, you have the reference here where we're seeing how that person, in this case, responds to light. So we can see things like subsurface scattering. And again, it's one of those things, if you don't capture this reference, you might not capture that in your shader. If the only reference you have is, say, this, then you might not capture this, and when it goes into shots, it might not look correct. So when people are seeing it lit in shots, they'll go, something's not right, something's not right. And if you just have the one reference image, the one lighting setup, you might not just pick out these smaller details, but very important details. So I took this from Logan Image Engine, which I think really shows all of this in action. So this is the ICT setup that they have used, and again the reference that they've captured, and then matching it to the CG render. So we have this really solid reference that we can then compare things to. And again, they've got everything in there from, they can check the subsurface scattering on the ears. Does our asset match the reference, or is it close? So yeah, it's a great little example of having solid reference that you can then just A/B against, and that's what you want to do with all of this stuff. Is anything you capture on set, you basically want to be able to A/B against that. But again, in order to do this A/B check, CG render to reference A/B, you need the HDRI, or you need the lighting, you need the geo for the set, you need information about the asset responding to light. You need the color information and the texture information. So all of this really goes into creating a really solid data set that you then can A/B against, and have something that you can go back to the client and say, here's why we think this should be approval, or then they have a reason to say, here's why we think it shouldn't be approved. It's again, removing guesswork is what Onset data allows you to do. Again, another example from Image Engine, so Logan again. And you can see here they've matched the Macbeth color chart, and then they're doing their CG on top. And if you get everything right, again, all the highlights should happen in the right place. And again, there's it's not a 100% one-to-one match. Like there's a bit of a highlight here in the eye. This isn't quite in the same place over here, but the things that will pass for sure. We're missing a little thing here, but again, it's 99% there, enough to fool the audience essentially. Just another example of their capture. Frame store, I put this up mainly for the reference that we're using here. And again, just more, looking at details, looking at subsurface scattering. This is the final renders, obviously, from frame store, but obviously without that information, they maybe wouldn't have put it in. ILM, Star Wars. So just showing how they're testing their setups by putting it under different lighting conditions. So once they've captured their data, even though this is a full CG asset, but they're still just checking that it responds to light as a human would, essentially. Just more examples of onset data. So here's the reference taken. Again, I didn't work on this show at all, but you've got this onset reference that they've captured that they're matching to. They've captured the lighting and so on, and then they put their digi in the same environment. So again, more examples. Reference from onset. Capture the HDRI, match everything with the Macbeth and the lights and the grey and the chrome balls, etc. And then put your asset in. Does it match this? Yes or no, essentially. So just threw this in for the fun of it. So again, this is just basic shaders, but the idea is to see how it responds to light. So what I do is again spin those lights around the asset. Usually, if I'm on set, and again, Dan might have a different story, you never really get time to spin the lights around an asset, I would say, especially if you've got multiple assets to shoot. So doing something like this would be a luxury, but if you can do it, if you have the time, I would.
Well, in terms of character,
yeah.
I mean, you can trick the that by kind of either walking around with a camera or not with a light source, or you can ask them. You don't get the full effect, but you can spin your character around at 45-degree increments,
yeah,
and you can get an idea of it like that rather than moving light sources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a trick.
Joe Dinder's asking, when you're setting up your polarizers on the lens and the lights, how do you tell if they're aligned properly?
If you look through your camera and look at anything that's metal, or that is perfectly specular, like a chrome ball or even the leg of a light stand or a C stand or whatever you've got, you'll see that go completely black.
Yeah, if someone's usually, I try and find someone with a fancy watch and then put that under there, or use the chrome ball. If that goes black, then you should be good to go. That's the best way. And then actually I would put this here and then readjust the lights to refine it. So the chrome ball would go where the asset is, the camera's here, here are the lights, and then I would just kind of tweak the light positions until this does go as black as possible. It's actually pretty hard to get it 100% black depending on your lighting environment, but you can get it, if you can control the lights in the room, you can get it pretty close. It's just capturing, again, capturing the lighting from the reference and then testing under different environments. So the idea is if you get everything kind of right here and it matches the reference here, then wherever you put your CG asset, it should work. Like that's the aim. Obviously there'll be shot tweaks and you might do minor tweaks depending on the sequence, because you'll want to sell something in the sequence. But if you can get everything working, 95% here, and then shot tweaks will be 5% of the work, then that's going to allow you to kind of have an asset pipeline that just flows a lot easier and a lot better. So just another example of testing the asset under different lighting environments as well, because that's very important. Because if you have a very strong light, you'll get strong shadows, and if you have a diffuse environment, the asset responds differently. So you have to get multiple, if you can shoot the asset under multiple different light sources, it allows you to see how that object responds to different lights. Car paints are a good example of testing under different light sources. A car paint on a sunny day could look completely different to a car paint on a cloudy day, or a car paint in an interior environment lit by halogen bulbs, for example. Sorry, this is if you're wondering what that is, that's like a pebble, they would call it, a paint pebble, car paint pebble. They usually use these pebbles to look at car paints in showrooms. But yeah, car paints look completely different under different lights, so you have to test them under multiple light sources essentially to see if it responds as you expect it to.
For the last show that I was on, there was a lot of CG cars that were needed, so we set up a neutral or a controlled environment, did a complete look dev pass on that, polarized, unpolarized, in a relatively blacked out tent. And we did look dev scenes, we did backplates for those, HDRIs, etc. in a controlled environment. And then we're going to be using them in different environments. So on every environment that we were in, there would either be it would be a sunny day or an overcast day, or both, depending on the weather. So we'd do the same setup and try and match the positions as best as we can in that environment, in addition to the controlled environment. So we have a look dev pass of every sort of imaginable light source that we have. So we can place those vehicles, the CG vehicles, not only in the controlled environment, but a look dev scene that we've set up for a exterior sunny day, bright sunny day environment, or morning, noon and afternoon, and then additionally an overcast version as well. So it's great to have a set that you can just throw your asset into many different environments as possible to make sure they look correct.
Yeah, I'll show you this. This is sequin blue, let's say, Bentley, and under different lighting it looks completely different. That one looks more like Moroccan blue, if I'm honest with you. This one's sequin blue, but under different lighting conditions, and obviously these images will have a layer of post-processing applied to them possibly, but this one paint can look extremely different under all different types of lighting. Another one, let's say for Bentley, is extreme silver, which can look very champagne like, or it can look very silver. So it's got a hint of yellow in there, but it only reveals itself when it gets hit by a strong light source. So again, it could be that your client looks at the car in this environment and says, okay, that's what I expect it to look like. And when you're presenting your look dev in a studio environment, it looks completely different. And they go, something's not right here. And until you can prove that it looks fine in other lighting scenarios that they can then have this kind of reference and line up to, it's very hard to get things signed off essentially. So being able to present your stuff under different lighting environments, and how the objects respond to that light is super crucial. Unless you're doing one sequence, then just do it for that sequence. Like if you're just doing one,
that's a good point to mention.
Yeah, we should mention, if you're doing a bespoke asset that's only for one sequence, there's really no point testing it under studio and 4 other different lighting setups. You might as well just do it specifically for that setup, or you're going to spend a lot of time doing stuff like this. For example, if this asset was just to go in this environment, and we have the environment ready and we have the lighting like 90% ready, then you might as well just do it in that environment, because there's no point spending an additional days, weeks, etc. Getting it ready for something that's only going to go in this setup. So yeah, you have to you have to be aware of that call, is you don't need to get every asset ready for every environment and every lighting setup. Here's just some examples of assets though. I think we looked at some of these last time, so I'll blast through them pretty quickly. So yeah, this has been tested in studio, it's then tested in a different environment. I have the photography as reference to see if it lines up. and so on. Again, I think we looked at these last time, so I'll blast through them pretty quickly. Has anyone else got any questions at the minute though? How do you match CG environment with real actor on green screen? Oh yeah, good question. Should I answer this one, Dan, or did you?
I suppose this is kind of a complex question, right?
Yeah, I like it.
Well, you'd have to build your CG environment to make it look correct, and obviously there's de-spilling that needs to occur. I mean, I suppose with like Iron Man and things like that, that is a really artistic approach to sort of calculate that, because it doesn't come for free. You've obviously got a lot of spill of different blue or green screens that are being used into your reflective surfaces. So I don't think you can do that simply by taking an extra reference. There's a lot of artistry that needs to be involved with that.
So I was just going to add to that. If you've got a green screen, they're still going to light the asset in the green screen. So this is from a recent shoot that I did. They're going to, usually when they're doing green screen setups, where is it? I've got to use a different tool, sorry, and I can't find it. Hang on, let me close that and see if it pops up. Oh, there it is. So usually when they're doing a green screen setup, they are going to not use green on green. That would be bad. Usually they're going to light the green screen. So this light here is for the green, and then we have this light here as well is for the green, and then we have some lights above here that is specifically for the green screen, and then the actor is going to go, let's say here, long arms, and they're going to be lit with a different lighting. We've got a bounce card here, we've got some diffuse light coming from above because it's meant to be like a cloudy day, let's say. So usually if you want to match your CG to the green screen shoot, then what you want to do is match the lighting that's been used to match the key asset, essentially, which is all of this stuff here and the bounce light. And then on top of that you can start adding all the other jazz to, for storytelling purposes. But that's where this still comes in. This still tells you what this light. Ideally, actually, you would capture this reference with the green screen lights turned off, because that then tells you what the hero lighting is for the shot, as opposed to the hero plus green screen lights. So that would be ideal, I guess, if you can.
Joe says, doesn't it depend on the lighting that is in the background plate? The question is, do you have a background plate?
And that's the other thing. So that's where things get tricky, is if your green screen lighting is nothing like your background plate, then you're already going to struggle, because your main hero asset just isn't going to sit in that plate. And the only way to fix that is to ideally light your asset the way that background plate is going to be lit. That would be the best case scenario. So when we did this shoot, we knew that it was meant to be a bit of a cloudy day, so we made the lighting quite cloudy and diffuse. So the lighting was intentionally designed to suit the CG and the backplate later on. We didn't light randomly and then hope for the best that it fits with the plate, and we didn't say we'll pick the plate later on. We kind of did some some test shots in Maya, in this case, of what that person was going to look like in the environment with a CG stand-in, and then we matched the lighting to be quite consistent with our CG setup, and then we gave that to the lighting team. They set this up, and then we could hopefully drop our backplate in without too much fuss. There's always a bit of fuss, but that was the aim. Which is why nowadays with the virtual production, that's great, because you have the real, or what will be used for final lighting in the set. So all of this will be illuminated with what will be going into the final shots, and that just defeats all of this green screen bounce and all of that stuff. It kind of allows you to get away from all of that, the issues you have with the green screen shoot. Okay, so I'll get rid of that. Marty's asking, have I got depth of field on this box? Yes, I have. Yeah, there's depth of field in the renders on here as it goes round. Yeah, there's depth of field here. I was pretending to use like a 100 or 200 mil lens. Is it a little too shallow?
Making it look pretty.
Sorry?
Trying to make it look pretty.
Yeah. He says, is it too shallow? It's debatable. Possibly, yeah.
Oh, in terms of photogrammetry capture, are you referring to?
Sorry.
As these are renders.
These are renders. Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to be fancy with the renders. If this was photogrammetry capture, yeah, too shallow. Texture shoot, yes, too shallow. I mean, with a texture shoot, you might find that really, actually, this angle is not a good angle. Really, you're capturing side on. If it stops here, if this was a texture shoot, go on. Yeah, you might capture this angle. So if there was a bit of depth of field back here, like there was, I guess I wouldn't be too concerned because I'll grab it with a different shot. I'll grab 3/4 as well, and I want this flat on. So I guess I'm not too concerned if there was a bit of depth of, unless I wanted that. Obviously, if I wanted that, I would want to increase the f-stop so I can get it into focus. Does that answer your question, Marty? Because is it the shallowness to do with if this was a texture shoot? We just wait for them to reply.
Say yes.
I don't know. We'll wait. Joe's asking, doesn't it depend on the lighting in the background plate? I think that's to do with the green screen shoot. Yes. Yeah. Your lighting in the background plate would ideally match your green screen shoot lighting. What you don't want to do is light randomly for green screen, and then if I just go back to this image here, you wouldn't want to say let's light for a cloudy day and then the back plate is a sunny day, because that's just not going to work too well.
And more often you would have a plate or an environment in mind prior to shooting your elements. So you'd either have a reel and you'd have an element selected and you'd match your lights. You wouldn't light something and then wait for the perfect opportunity to catch your environment in a lighting setup that is only predictable by the Met Office.
And I guess if you're doing, if they say this is set during the day and then suddenly they change it to an evening or, nighttime shot, then the footage is only going to do what it can do. There's only so much you can push it to go from day to night. And if the lighting is daylight and then you're saying it's nighttime, there's only so much you can do, I guess. Hader, and when doing your HDRIs with the color, do you replace the green screens before exporting the HDRIs? Yeah, good question. Yeah, for this, yes. If I was, the HDRI, which I got an image here as well. Here we go. It's really the HDRI is for reference. I wouldn't use this as the main lighting because I wouldn't want all this green reflecting. Oh yeah, I can use this.
Extract your light sources if anything.
Yeah, exactly. I would extract all of this. That gets extracted, all of this. And then this gets replaced with whatever the floor is going to be. If it's a metal grey floor or a bright blue floor, that's what we want reflected into the asset. So yeah, I would extract these lights out and use and then position them in 3D space and then rebuild the set to whatever that CG set is going to be. I'd use this bounce card still because that's going to reflect, but yeah, all of this you wouldn't want that in the HDRI, or in your lighting, let's say. So again, HDRIs for me are just reference. As much as we like to stick them in and just hit render, they're there to help you extract information from. So it's reference. It shouldn't just be drop in the HDRI, hit render, that's lighting done.
I suppose they can be sometimes used as reflections if you've got like a windshield, for example. But you would use go and take an HDRI of your environment, or you would film a sequence that that would be suited to your reflections and use that rather than the studio HDRI anyway.
Do you take the chrome ball and the grain ball reference in CG first and try to match the real life ball? Do you take the chrome ball and grey ball in CG first and match the real life ball? So, I mean, you would have a CG version of these two. Ideally, your CG versions would be, given the whole full look dev treatment to match the physical balls. So I guess it doesn't really matter. Do you take the Cray and the Chrome reference in CG first and match the real life? Well, you would shoot this reference, and then you would have the CG versions, and you would match in CG in post. Does that make sense? If not, just shout Abdul that it doesn't make sense, and I can pull up a different example. Okay, let me just check these questions. I was fooled. I thought it was photogrammetry shot. Okay, Marty 4. Oh, good. That was the idea. Actually, so yeah, the whole intention of this was an exercise, and the exercise was I want to capture good photogrammetry, texture, look dev reference, and I can just slap it all on and hit render. So the actual the only bit I had to do is retopologize the camera. For mostly everything else, I just slapped on the textures. I did have to do some manual stuff for the different materials and the layers. But if you get good onset reference, what you do in post can be kind of, the amount of time it takes to do something can be closed down so much that you can do something in a week or in very little time. So all of this...
sometimes 5 minutes on set saves you 3 days work post.
Yeah, without a doubt. So when I shot this asset, I spent 6 hours with it. I did photogrammetry, texture, look dev, HDRI, the whole shebang. I spent 6 hours start to finish, close-up shots, everything. So I didn't have to guess anything later on. It was all... So
the question then therefore would be, if you just had a couple of reference photos from your iPhone or through a shop window and it's sitting in a podium, how long do you think it would have taken you to build this from scratch with just a couple of reference photos?
But I guess the thing is, I wouldn't know if I had done it correctly because I wouldn't have had the information to make that call. So I could have done it in the same amount of time and said, well, that's what my 2 images looks like, so therefore what's your problem, Dan? But essentially you could do that. You could just say, well, it matches these 2 images, so what's why are you giving me grief? So yeah, I guess that's the tricky thing is knowing when is it right, when is it finished, and I guess you don't unless you have that information. I was looking for, I don't know if I have the data here. I was going to pull up the data for this, but I don't think I have it. But yeah, again, I did very little work in post for this essentially, because I had the reference. And that's, to be honest, when I said about Jennifer Lawrence's tiara, it was the same for that as well. I spent 6 hours with that. We had good photogrammetry reference, good texture reference, good look dev reference. It was a very quick process. I didn't build the asset, but I was told it was very quick to build the asset because we had all the data. So again, just looking at real world reference, Frame Store, Winnie the Pooh, because they have such good reference, they have the lighting, they have everything to match, they can get this one-to-one and get client sign off very easily. Once they put all the hard work in.